The ritual of the Red Room. The air in the cellar didn't just smell of damp stone and iron-heavy blood, it tasted of static. A low, rhythmic hum vibrated through the floorboards, the sound of servers, of fiber-optic cables, of a billion eyes watching from the dark corners of the internet. Rachel hung suspended, her wrists anchored by cold, industrial-grade steel shackles. Her head lolled, a tapestry of bruising across her cheekbone, her breath coming in ragged, shallow hitches. Beside her, Sarah was braced against a heavy iron rack, her hands bound behind her, her knuckles white. "Look at them." David Thorne's voice was smooth, a cultured baritone that cut through the oppressive heat of the room like a scalpel. He stood at a console, his fingers dancing across a haptic interface. "They're so very invested in you, girls. They've been refreshing the feed for hours. The engagement metrics for your little tragedy are, frankly, unprecedented." He gestured to a wall of monitors. They weren't displaying static. They were showing the interior of the manor. "Matt," David noted, tilting his head as he tapped a key. On screen, a grainy night vision feed showed the kitchen. Matt was there, backed against the pantry door, his chest heaving. He was clutching a heavy iron fire poker, his eyes wide, reflecting the terror of a cornered animal. Behind him, emerging from the shadows like liquid smoke, was Mark. The vampire didn't rush. He drifted, enjoying the frantic, rhythmic tapping of Matt's heart against his ribs. "No," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. "Please. David, stop it. You've already won. We're here. We're in your cage." David glanced over his shoulder, his eyes gleaming with a manic, intellectual fervor. "Won? Oh, my dear Sarah, winning is a binary outcome. It's boring. I'm conducting a symphony of human degradation. I need to see exactly how much pressure it takes to snap a soul before the physical shell gives out." On the monitor, Mark lunged. It was a blur of violence, an efficiency so brutal it defied physics. Matt didn't even have time to scream before the screen exploded into a frantic, shaking mess of motion. The feed cut to black, replaced by a text overlay on a dark red background. Signal interrupted. "Reconnecting." "There he goes," David murmured, sounding genuinely disappointed. "Always so sloppy with his meals." Rachel's eyes flickered open, pupils dilated, swimming in a haze of pain. She looked at the monitors, then at Sarah. Her voice was a dry, rasping whisper. "Sarah, don't watch. Don't you dare give him the satisfaction of watching." "Rachel," Sarah sobbed, her pragmatism splintering under the weight of the carnage. She tried to pull against her restraints, the steel biting into her wrists, drawing fresh blood. "I'm so sorry. I told you. I told you we shouldn't have come." "The blame game is a fascinating cognitive defense mechanism," David said, moving toward them. He picked up a long, needle-thin instrument from a velvet-lined tray. It glowed with a faint, sickly bioluminescence. "But it won't save you. You see, the ritual requires a specific chemical signature in the blood. It requires trauma. Genuine, unmitigated despair. The internet is helping me harvest that." He leaned in close to Rachel. She tried to spit at him, but her throat was too parched. He caught her chin in a grip of iron, forcing her to look at the next monitor. Emily and Eleanor were huddled in the library, barricaded behind a heavy mahogany desk. They were crying, clinging to each other, their faces streaked with dirt and terror. "This is the part where the variables usually fail," David whispered into Rachel's ear. "They try to fight. They try to bargain. They die, and the energy dissipates. But you? You have potential. You have a lineage that whispers to the void." He pressed the glowing instrument into the soft skin of Rachel's neck. She gasped, her back arching violently, her scream cut short as the device sent a surge of white-hot agony through her nervous system. "Watch, Sarah," David commanded, his voice cold. "Watch what happens when the human construct is dismantled. Watch what happens when the hunger replaces the hope." On the monitor, the library door burst inward. Jack, a hulking, silent brute of a vampire, stepped into the frame. Emily screamed, a high, piercing sound that set Sarah's teeth on edge. "Make it stop!" Sarah shrieked, thrashing against her bonds until her shoulders strained and groaned. "I'll do whatever you want. Just stop the feed. Turn it off." David didn't look back. He was transfixed by the screens, his hand hovering over the controls, guiding his performers like a sadistic puppeteer. Turn it off? And rob the world of your final moments of humanity? No, Sarah. The audience is just reaching the climax. The Red Room is at capacity. They're paying in cryptocurrency for the privilege of seeing you two fall. He pressed a button. A high-pitched tone filled the room, matching the frequency of the pulse in Rachel's neck. Rachel's body began to twitch, her veins turning a bruised, pulsing black beneath her skin. She wasn't just in pain, she was changing. The anatomy of her fear was being overwritten. "He's killing them, Rachel." Sarah cried out, her eyes darting between the girl she had known her entire life and the screen where their friends were being picked off like insects. "He's killing them and he's using us to do it." Rachel's head dropped back, her jaw locking. A low, inhuman sound bubbled up from her chest, a mixture of a growl and a sob. Her eyes snapped open, and for a fleeting second, the hazel was gone, replaced by a shimmering, predatory gold. "He's not killing them, Sarah," Rachel choked out, her voice dropping an octave, vibrating with a resonance that wasn't human. "He's feeding them to us." David froze. He looked at the monitors, then back at Rachel, his smile faltering for the first time. He took a half step back, his fingers twitching toward the console. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp. Rachel's lips curled back, revealing teeth that were lengthening, sharpening into jagged, translucent needles. The shackles on her wrists groaned, the iron groaning under the sudden, impossible pressure of her muscles. "You think you're the director?" Rachel hissed, her body vibrating with a newfound, terrifying intensity. "You're just the bait." The monitor showing the library flickered. Emily and Eleanor were gone. The room was empty, save for the blood spattered against the bookshelves. "The feed," David muttered, tapping the keys frantically. "Why is the feed dropping?" "Mark? Jack? Report." Static hissed from the console. Rachel's laughter was a jagged, horrific sound. It wasn't the sound of a girl anymore. It was the sound of a creature waking up in a cage it had already outgrown. She pulled, the sound of tearing metal echoing through the cellar. The anchor bolt in the wall screamed, concrete dust raining down as the steel began to buckle. "Sarah," Rachel said, not looking at her friend, her focus fixed entirely on the sorcerer. "Stop holding back. The human is dead. It's time to eat." Sarah stared, paralyzed by the sight of her best friend, or what was left of her. But as she watched, she felt it too, the cold, hollow pit in her stomach, a hunger so profound it made her own survival seem like a secondary, trivial concern. She looked at her hands, the skin pale and shivering, and then she felt the snap. It started in her marrow, a cold, crystalline fire that burned away the fear, leaving behind only a razor-sharp, agonizing clarity. David Thorne backed away, his face pale, his eyes wide as he realized the experiment had moved past the stage of observation. He grabbed a heavy, ornate dagger from his belt, the blade etched with sigils that hummed with dark, defensive energy. "I can still shut you down," David spat, his voice losing its composure. "I can burn this entire manor to the ground with you inside it." "Try it," Rachel said, her voice dripping with a predatory lethality. With one final, violent surge, she tore her right arm free. The shackles hung from her wrist like a broken bracelet of iron. She didn't fall, she stood, crouched like a panther, her movements fluid and impossibly fast. She took a step toward him, and the floorboards beneath her cracked under the sudden, concentrated weight of her intent. The cameras on the wall began to spark, the lenses cracking one by one as if the very air around the girls had turned into a corrosive, supernatural weight. "The red room is closed," Sarah whispered, her own eyes shifting, the gold light igniting in her gaze as she pulled her hands free, the metal of the cuffs snapping like dry twigs. They stood together, two shadows in the center of the room, blocking the only exit. The master of the house was, for the first time in centuries, looking at something he couldn't control. And for the first time, he realized that the harvest wasn't going to be what he expected. The cellar floor was a mosaic of filth and ancient, blood-stained mortar. David Thorne stood amidst the flickering glow of a dozen monitors, his silhouette elongated by the harsh, artificial light. He moved with the rhythmic precision of a conductor, his fingers dancing over a control board that fed the images of the girls' dead and dying friends to a ravenous, invisible audience. Rachel was pinned to the stone altar, her wrists encased in shackles of cold, etched iron. The air around her pulsed with a nauseating, ozone-heavy static, the byproduct of Thorne's alchemical machinery. "The architecture of the soul is remarkably fragile, Sarah," Thorne murmured, his voice a smooth, cultured rasp that grated against the guttural whimpering emerging from Rachel's throat. "It requires only a little heat, a little pressure, and a total collapse of the moral framework." Sarah was forced into a kneeling position, her shoulder held fast by Mark's petrified, icy grip. She watched, her jaw locked so tight her teeth ached, as the ritual began in earnest. Thorne didn't use a knife. He used light, a concentrated, searing beam of violet energy channeled through a prism of obsidian suspended above the altar. As it struck Rachel's chest, the smell of ozone shifted into the metallic tang of cauterized flesh and something far older, like ozone and graveyard dirt. Rachel's back arched, her spine snapping against the stone with a sickening, wet crunch that echoed in the cavernous space. A scream ripped from her, not a human sound, but a jagged, harmonic distortion that seemed to vibrate the very foundations of the manor. Her skin, once flushed with the warmth of life, began to drain, turning a translucent, bruised gray. "Look at her," Thorne commanded, leaning into the camera lens with a manicured grin. "Watch the transition. See how the burden of humanity is discarded like a moth-eaten shroud." Sarah's vision blurred. The pragmatic, logical wall she had built around her psyche was being dismantled, brick by bloody brick. She saw the veins in Rachel's neck turning pitch black, pulsing with a rhythmic, unnatural tide. Rachel's hair, once auburn, bleached out to a stark, brittle white under the intensity of the sorcerer's art. "Stop it!" Sarah shrieked, the sound swallowed by the mechanical hum of the room. "Kill me instead. Stop this." "Death is the easy way out, my dear," Thorne replied without looking at her, his eyes fixed on the streaming data of Rachel's vitals. "You both have roles to play. You are the canvas upon which I will paint a new history. Your loyalty is your anchor, Sarah, and I am about to snap the chain." He adjusted a dial. The violet light intensified. Rachel's eyes snapped open. The irises were gone, replaced by a swirling, obsidian abyss that bled darkness into the surrounding tissue. She stopped screaming, but her body continued to convulse, a marionette caught in a storm of dark kinetic energy. The iron shackles began to glow, then warp, as her newfound strength tore them from the stone. She wasn't just surviving, she was being hollowed out and refilled with a predatory, cold consciousness. "Rachel!" Sarah screamed again, lunging forward, but Mark slammed her face back into the dirt. The impact jarred her teeth, and the metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. "She is no longer the girl who wandered into these woods," Thorne said, stepping aside as the obsidian prism hissed and dimmed. He gestured toward Sarah. "She is the first draft. And you, Sarah? You are the refinement." He signaled to Mark. The vampire hoisted Sarah up by her hair, dragging her toward the altar where Rachel now lay, shivering in the aftershocks of the alchemy. Rachel's gaze drifted toward Sarah, a cold, blank look that lacked recognition, replaced by a primal, starving intensity. Sarah saw the transformation in real time. Rachel's fingernails had elongated into jagged, serrated talons. Her lips were pulled back to reveal teeth that had sharpened into lethal, needle-like points. The monster was wearing her friend's skin. "The process is agonizing, yes," Thorne whispered into Sarah's ear, his breath smelling of withered rose petals and decay. "But think of the power. The speed. The ability to taste the very secrets hidden in the blood of those who would hunt you. You have two choices: submit to the alchemy and embrace the hunger, or remain human and be consumed by it. I assure you, the hunger is much more elegant." Sarah looked at the altar, then at the camera lens glowing red in the corner of the room. A million faceless spectators were watching this, cheering for the destruction of her humanity. The rage that ignited in her chest wasn't human. It was a cold, sharp, focused hatred, the first seed of her own evolution. "Do it," Sarah hissed, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a burgeoning, violent resolve. "Do it, and I will burn this entire house down with you inside it." Thorne chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. "That, my dear, is the spirit." He pushed her down onto the cold, damp surface. As the obsidian prism pivoted toward her, Sarah didn't close her eyes. She stared directly into the lens of the camera, burning the image of Thorne's face into her mind. The violet light descended, and as the searing, cold fire touched her skin, she didn't scream. She inhaled. She felt her heartbeat stutter, slow, and then cease. The silence that followed was absolute. She wasn't human anymore, but as the darkness flooded her veins, she realized that Thorne had made a critical, fatal error. He hadn't created a puppet. He had forged a weapon. The cellar was a tomb of weeping stone and rusted iron, smelling of wet earth and the copper tang of spilled blood. Rachel lay sprawled across the flagstones, her body an agonizing landscape of fire. Every nerve ending felt as though it had been pulled through a needle's eye and threaded into something much sharper, much colder. She opened her eyes. The room was no longer just a room. The shadows in the corners didn't merely exist, they breathed. They pooled like spilled ink, undulating in rhythm with her own jagged, hitching heartbeats. She could hear the hum of the electronic equipment stacked against the far wall, a high-frequency whine of power cables and cooling fans, and it sounded like a choir of screaming insects. Across the room, Sarah was huddled against a concrete pillar, her knuckles white, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. She looked like a bird with a broken wing, her pragmatic, analytical mind caught in a feedback loop of trauma. "Sarah," Rachel rasped. The sound of her own voice startled her. It wasn't the voice of the girl who had arrived on the ferry that morning. It was deeper, layered with a vibration that made the dust motes in the air dance. Sarah flinched, her eyes darting to the glass eye of the camera mounted above the doorway. A red LED blinked with methodical, predatory patience, David Thorne's gaze, unblinking and distant. "Don't," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "They're watching. They're always watching." Rachel pushed herself up. Her joints popped, not with the ache of a sprain, but with the snap of a shifting, hardening structure. She felt heavier, denser, as if her skin had become armor. She looked at her hands. The blood beneath her fingernails was dark, almost black, and the skin was pale, translucent as parchment. "Let them watch," Rachel said. She stood, her legs trembling only for a second before the new, alien strength in her muscles locked them into place. She didn't feel human anymore, but she didn't feel broken either. She felt like a coiled spring. Sarah stood, leaning heavily against the wall. "Rachel, we have to stay down. If we move, if we fight back, he'll kill us. He wants the show. He wants the breakdown. He wants a victim," Rachel hissed, turning toward the camera. She could see the heat signature of the wiring behind the wall, a glowing, pulsing nervous system of electricity. She could hear the faint, frantic tapping of a keyboard in the room above, the rhythmic clicking of a man enjoying the misery of others. "He's going to get something else." Rachel stepped toward the wall, her movements fluid and predatory. The hunger, an abysmal, yawning pit in her stomach, was no longer just an instinct. It was a compass. It pulled her toward the living, toward the pulse, toward the heat of the life Thorne was draining from the island. She reached out, touching the cold, damp stone. She didn't just feel the texture, she felt the age of it. She felt the vibrations of the house settling into the bedrock. Beneath the stone, there was a seam, a hairline fracture where the masonry had failed years ago. Beyond that, a hollow space. A crawl space for the rats and the ghosts. "Sarah," Rachel whispered, not turning around. "Listen to me. Close your eyes. Don't look at the lens. Listen to the room." Sarah hesitated, then obeyed. She shut her eyes, her face tight with effort. "What do you hear?" Rachel asked. "The machines," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The hum. The electrical current. It's like a swarm of bees." "Focus on the sound of the air," Rachel instructed. "The way it moves through the walls. There's a draft. A cold, damp draft coming from behind the east wall." Sarah took a deep, shuddering breath. Her shoulders dropped. The transformation was rewriting her, too. Her intellect was no longer limited to logic and deduction. It was expanding into the realm of the senses, a terrifying, hyper-aware expansion. "There's a gap. The foundation has shifted near the support pillar. It's thin, but the air is circulating." "It's not just a gap," Rachel said, her fingers digging into the mortar. With a grunt of exertion that sounded more like a growl, she tore a chunk of the stone away. It crumbled like stale bread. "It's an exit." The camera above them swiveled, the motor whirring, a mechanical scream. David Thorne was watching, and he was likely laughing. To him, they were just rats in a maze, frantic and dying. "He thinks we're trapped," Rachel said, her eyes glowing with a faint, hellish luminescence. "He thinks he's the one who controls the script. But he's forgotten one thing about monsters, Sarah." Sarah opened her eyes. They were wide, reflecting the dark. "What?" "Monsters don't follow the rules of the house." Rachel drove her shoulder into the stone partition. With a screech of tearing metal and the groan of shifting masonry, the wall gave way. A cloud of black, ancient dust billowed out, choking the air. Beyond the wall lay a narrow, claustrophobic chute, a forgotten service tunnel that ran the length of the foundation. "Get in," Rachel commanded. Sarah crawled through the opening, her movements efficient, her terror hardening into a cold, diamond-sharp resolve. As Rachel followed, she felt a sudden, sharp sting of hunger, a memory of what they had lost, what Thorne had taken from them. She looked back at the red room, the studio of their torment, and then at the camera. She reached up, gripped the lens, and crushed it. The red light vanished. The screen in the world above surely went dead. In the darkness of the tunnel, Rachel could hear Sarah's pulse, a rhythmic, steady drumming that had once been the sound of a terrified girl, but was now the heartbeat of an apex predator. "They're going to come for us," Sarah said, her voice steady now, devoid of its previous tremor. "Thorne." "The others." "Let them," Rachel replied, pulling her lips back from teeth that had grown sharp and serrated. "I'm tired of being the prey." They began to move through the dark, their eyes adjusting to the absolute absence of light. Every scratch on the wall was a map, every shift in the air was a warning. They were no longer the lost teenagers who had wandered into the manor for a thrill. They were the shadows themselves, creeping through the gut of the beast, waiting for the right moment to bite back. As they crawled, the smell of the house changed. The rot of the manor gave way to the metallic, ozone-heavy scent of the upper levels. Thorne was waiting for a spectacle, for a slow, agonizing descent into madness. He was about to get a hunt instead. They reached a junction where the narrow crawl space opened into a vertical shaft. Pipes, thick with rust and age, stretched upward like the veins of a titan. Rachel placed a hand on a pipe, feeling the vibration of water rushing through the building, a steady, rhythmic pulse. "Up," Rachel signaled. They scaled the vertical shaft, their fingers finding purchase in cracks where no human should have been able to cling. They moved with a predatory grace, their bodies reacting faster than their thoughts. As they neared the ceiling of the cellar and the floorboards of the kitchen above, the house shifted. A heavy, booted step echoed above them. Mark. The enforcer was pacing, his rhythmic stride vibrating through the floorboards. He was humming a melody, something discordant and mocking. The sound triggered a primal, boiling rage in Rachel's gut. The memory of his teeth, the way he had pinned her down, the way he had laughed as he changed her, it all surged to the surface. She stopped, pressing her back against the pipe. She signaled Sarah to wait. Above, the pacing stopped. Mark wasn't alone. Another voice, gruff, gravelly, and smelling of stale tobacco, drifted down through the floorboards. Jack. They're gone, boss, Jack said, his voice muffled. The signal just cut. Someone smashed the camera. A third voice replied, smooth, cultured, and dripping with arrogance. David Thorne. They are learning, Jack, Thorne said. It's a beautiful thing to witness. The transition is rarely this clean. They're finding their legs. They're finding their teeth. And if they come up here? Mark asked, his voice low and dangerous. Then we have a real show, Thorne replied. Don't kill them. Not yet. I want them to see what happens when their survival instinct meets the reality of their limitations. Rachel felt Sarah's hand on her arm. Sarah's grip was firm, her eyes meeting Rachel's in the dark. There was no fear in Sarah's gaze anymore, only a cold, tactical hunger. She tapped 3 times on Rachel's forearm. Prepare. We strike. Rachel nodded. She leaned her head back, listening to the location of the 3 men. She could hear their heartbeats, 3 distinct, rhythmic thuds. Thorne's was slow, arrogant. Mark's was frantic, fueled by adrenaline and violence. Jack's was heavy, sluggish. They weren't just prey. They were the ones who had built the cage. And the cage was about to be broken from the inside out. Rachel felt the shadow power rising within her, a cold, liquid sensation that blurred the edges of her vision. She could feel the darkness in the room above, the way it clung to the corners, waiting to be commanded. She reached out, grasping the tendrils of the night, ready to weave them into a shroud. Ready, she whispered. Sarah bared her teeth, the transformation complete in the lines of her face, a mask of cold, calculated fury. Let's ruin his show. Rachel reached up, her claws sinking into the rotting floorboards above, and began to pull. The wood groaned under the unnatural strength of her grip, the nails screaming as they were ripped from the joists. The floor above exploded.